Norm MacDonald was a man who lived by the dictum that the jest's success lay not merely in the telling, but in the truth it revealed. A comedian in the truest sense of the word, he possessed that rarest of abilities to be simultaneously irreverent and profoundly sincere. His jokes, carefully crafted yet delivered with an off-handed casualness, were arrows aimed at the heart of the human condition, absurdity, hypocrisy, and the ceaseless folly of our existence. In a world increasingly divided by the crass and the superficial, Norm stood as an outlier, a figure unwilling to be moulded by the ideological dogma that so often strangles the creative spirit. Yet in death, this very independence has been grotesquely repurposed by those who would seek to claim him as a standard-bearer for their own rancid philosophies. It is a tragic irony that the man who so despised lazy thinking and moral absolutism has been posthumously transformed into a symbol of the very things he detested. Let us begin with the man himself. Born in Quebec City, raised in the cultural mosaic of Canada, Norm MacDonald was imbued with a sensibility that was distinctly Canadian. Polite, yes, but also underpinned by a dry, self-deprecating humour and a deep-seated sense of fairness. His early years as a stand-up comedian saw him sharpening his craft in the smoke-filled clubs of Ottawa, Montreal and Toronto, where he honed a style that was uniquely his own. It was a style that eschewed the broad, slapstick humour so common in the American scene in favour of something more subtle, more incisive. Norm's ascent to fame on Saturday Night Live in the 1990s was marked by a fearless approach to comedy that often left his audiences stunned. He was not afraid to confront the powerful, the sacred, or the taboo. But he did so with a light touch, never allowing his humour to descend into cruelty. His infamous O.J. Simpson jokes, which ultimately cost him his job as the anchor of Weekend Update, were not born of malice but of a relentless pursuit of truth. Norm saw through the charade of the Simpson trial, and he used his platform to call out the absurdity of a nation that was willing to turn a blind eye to justice in favour of spectacle. It is here that we see the true measure of Norm MacDonald. He was a man who saw the world as it was, not as it pretended to be. He understood that humour was a weapon, but one that needed to be wielded with care. His jokes were surgical strikes, not bludgeons, and he had little patience for those who used comedy as a cudgel to bash their enemies into submission. Yet in the years since his passing, a sinister transformation has taken place. Norm MacDonald, the comedian who revelled in ambiguity and despised extremism, has been co-opted by the far right, repackaged as a crusader against political correctness, a hero for those who see themselves as victims of a liberal conspiracy to silence dissent. It is a perverse distortion of his legacy, a travesty that speaks more to the vacuity of his posthumous admirers than to the man himself. How has this happened? How has Norm MacDonald, a man who was as likely to lampoon the excesses of the right as he was the left, become a symbol of hate and division? The answer, I fear, lies in the very nature of our times. A time when nuance is dead, when complexity is eschewed in favour of binary choices, when the art of conversation has been replaced by the dull roar of partisan rancour. In this environment, Norm's comedy has been stripped of its context, its subtlety, and its intent. Selective quotes, out-of-context clips, and willful misinterpretations have been used to paint him as a martyr for the so-called anti-woke cause. His critiques of political correctness have been exaggerated, his jokes about social issues twisted into endorsements of reactionary ideology. It is a posthumous identity theft, an act of cultural vandalism that seeks to recast a thoughtful, intelligent comedian as a blunt instrument for the far-right's culture war. Consider, for example, his well-documented admiration for Amy Schumer. Schumer, a comedian who has become a lightning rod for criticism from the right due to her outspoken feminism and liberal views, was someone Norm publicly praised for her talent and fearlessness. Yet this simple truth has been dismissed by those who would rather believe that Norm despised her and everything she stood for. To admit that Norm respected Schumer is to admit that he was not the ideologue they wish him to be, and so they reject it, preferring their delusion to the reality of Norm's inclusive, albeit sharp-edged, appreciation of comedy. Moreover, Norm's Canadian heritage, with its inherent cultural moderation, has been conveniently overlooked by those who now claim him as their own. In Canada, conservatism is often tempered with a sense of social responsibility and respect for differing viewpoints, traits that Norm exhibited throughout his career. But to acknowledge this would be to undermine the narrative of Norm as a warrior against the forces of liberalism. And so it is ignored, replaced by a version of Norm that is more palatable to those who see the world in stark black and white. This distortion of Norm's legacy is not just a disservice to his memory. It is a reflection of the intellectual and moral bankruptcy of those who seek to claim him. In their desperation to find a cultural icon who can validate their grievances, they have latched onto Norm MacDonald. But in doing so, they have betrayed their own ignorance of the man and his work. They have turned a complex, nuanced comedian into a caricature of their own making, a caricature that says more about them than it does about Norm. Let us be clear. Norm MacDonald was not a creature of hate or division. He was a comedian who believed in the power of humor to illuminate the truth, to challenge assumptions, and to bring people together, even as it made them uncomfortable. He was a man who understood that the world is full of contradictions, and that the role of the comedian is to explore those contradictions, not to exploit them for cheap laughs or easy applause. In the end, Norm MacDonald's true legacy is one of integrity, intelligence, and an unwavering commitment to the art of comedy. He was a man who refused to be boxed in by ideology, who rejected the simplistic narratives that so often dominate our discourse. His humor was a reminder that life is messy, complicated, and often absurd, and that the best we can do is to laugh at it together. It is this legacy that we must honor, not the hollow, hate-filled version that has been foisted upon us by those who never truly understood him. Norm MacDonald deserves better than to be remembered as a pawn in someone else's culture war. He deserves to be remembered as he was, a comedian who saw the world with clear eyes, who spoke the truth as he saw it, and who, above all, made us laugh at the absurdity of it all.